Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick. It's time for this week's Friday Morning GM with my co-host, Vas Laricos. Vas, how you doing?
Life is good, Ken. I am a lot has happened in the last week since we spoke. The Ravens have hired two coordinators. They've fleshed out probably about half of their staff, and seems to be a very highly regarded staff. Comparing them to some of the other teams that are looking to fill out their staff, uh, Ravens look like Jesse Minter's done a tremendous job adding talent to the coaching staff.
This is one of these things like the day after the draft, you think your team had the greatest draft that ever was. And we've been in this position, the Ravens, and fortunately things have generally worked out pretty well with the Ravens drafts over the years. I think the Ravens coaching staff has taken a lot of very positive risk, high expected value risks in hiring some young guys. It's a very young staff and a couple old guys who I think bring very specific and significant talents. And so we're going to get into a fair amount of that today. Of course, we talked about Dwayne Ledford and Mike Mickens last week. So we don't have to talk about them again. That's all they had put together. And since then, what a rogues gallery of coaches they've hired. And we'll begin with the first is Declan Doyle, who's brought in from the Bears staff, where he's nominally the OC, he was involved in game planning, but didn't call the plays directly. He'll be the new OC here in Baltimore.
So to piggyback on your original point, there is certainly some risk, high risk. I think the Ravens are going, or at least Minter is going for more ceiling than floored necessarily with his staff. And I think that's a wise move because the Ravens has some institutional factors that elevate the floor. BPA, comp picks, UDFAs, that sort of thing. So I think it does make sense to swing high on a coordinator. Doyle was my third preference as of last recording. And I believe that was before Joe Brady and Mike McDaniel were officially announced. So he's essentially was my first choice, if you look at it that way. I also think it's notable that he comes from the Sean Payton tree, which is probably an advantage to the Ravens as far as filling out the staff, because some of the other trees have a lot of head coaches trying to poach from the same, swim fish in the same pond. And the Payton staff is not quite as picked through.
Well, ideally, you'd be linked to everybody's tree, but I think it's always good to pick out one new things. But there are a lot of Payton people. I think this does bring up a potential conflict with Lamar Jackson that I want to get into a little bit later. But Doyle is only 30 this year, first opportunity as a play caller, which is this is unbelievably young to be doing this. But look, some of the ages on the staff are incredible. He was an offensive assistant for the Saints in 19 to 22, and then again with the Broncos in 23 to 24, where he got rehired by Payton. And he's the one who hired him into the NFL originally. Big improvement in the Bears this last year with them. Notably, really cut down Caleb Williams' sack rate from 10.8% to 4.1%. More quick release stuff. I know he still throws the bomb. It's absolutely true. And we saw him throw that 40-yard touchdown pass at the end of the playoff game that got him tied. But definitely a guy who gets rid of the ball quicker than he did as a rookie.
I think you should also note that Chicago did make some big investments on their offensive line before last season, Joe Thuney in particular. From a schematic point of view, if Doyle is going to bring over the Ben Johnson offense, they don't use a fullback. They didn't use a fullback last year. They were 52% 11 personnel, 33% 12, and 9% 13, compared to the Ravens, who are only 30% 11, 36% 12, and then a couple different formations that include fullbacks. So we're not positive that he's going to take from Ben Johnson. He could go, for example, Payton did use a fullback, but it is something to consider. And I personally would be in favor of spreading the field out a little bit more, being a little bit more unpredictable for the defense and providing a little more space at the line of scrimmage. So I would like to see that shift to more 11.
Well, it's possible we'll get that. It's always one of the things with a new head coach, and certainly with a new offensive coordinator as well. It's all up in the air whether they continue to use a fullback. But the Ravens DNA, and this is part of what I'm talking about when I say keeping the Ravens way. Having the option to have that fullback is quite valuable. And Ricard being a really good blocking inline tight end, I don't think he necessarily loses his spot. The Bears certainly played some 12 with a tight end in the backfield not just as
Right.
so sometimes it's semantics as to whether somebody's a fullback or not. But Ricard, we've talked about him as a tight end / fullback for years. We've always included him with a tight end group when we talk about that. And I think more than likely he'll be re-signed. And although there will be competition for him, don't get me wrong, and they'll try and use a fullback in some way just because I think they'll be used to it. Some of this also goes to Dwayne Ledford and how he wants to run the run game, and he may be very comfortable working with a fullback, and that may be something they have to work out.
I believe they did not use a fullback in Atlanta. I thought I looked that up, but I'll double check that as you make your next point.
The last point I want to make, and this is important, is that the Peyton offenses have a lot of getting rid of the ball very quickly. And that worked extremely well for Drew Brees. Super accurate quarterback. In fact, it was his single greatest trait as a quarterback was accuracy. He always was doing these things about hitting moving targets and whatnot you may have seen on TV. But
Yes.
Super accurate and super on-time quarterback, that is not Lamar Jackson. That is not Lamar Jackson. So if you force Lamar Jackson into an offense where he's going to throw a bunch of slants and a bunch of, just throws right over the defense, which he needs to have in his game. Don't get me wrong on that. He needs to have the ability to throw on time when he needs to throw on schedule. But I just wouldn't want the offense to be completely predicated on that because I think it takes away a lot of the explosiveness that Lamar has by extending plays and making big plays down the field.
Completely agree. You don't want to take that away, Lamar's superhuman ability. So Atlanta did not use a fullback last year for what it's worth. Still doesn't mean it's not impossible, but it is going to be an interesting marriage between Ledford's run scheme and Declan's pass scheme. I would say Kelly Williams did certainly had some freedom for the improvisational ability. Some of the plays he made in that playoff game reminded me of Lamar Jackson. So I'm encouraged by Doyle. It's certainly a risk when you have a guy this young and this inexperienced. And I was a little bit hoping for someone with more experience as a play caller after seeing some of the issues that Zach Orr had. But when you have Ledford, who has called plays, as well as the other senior offensive assistant, who we're going to get to in a minute here, who also has offensive coordinator experience, I'm going to hope for the best for sure.
All right. Would you like to talk about the rest of the offensive coaches first, or you want to jump over and talk about Anthony Weaver?
Yeah, why don't we go side by side? Let's do the offense.
All right. Well, let's do that then, and we'll go to the big one. I love this hire. A theft from the Steelers of Eddie Faulkner, their running backs coach for the last 7 years. Now, Faulkner brings a lot to the organization, but the big thing the Steelers always had that I could never figure out why they were so much better than the Ravens is very high missed tackle force rates. Some of it's probably in terms of the type of player they draft, center of gravity they may be emphasizing and things like that. Derrick Henry had his worst year for missed tackles forced in this last year, 0.140. Only worst year he ever had in his career was 0.136 as a rookie. So, and he's 0.19 and change in his career. That's higher at 0.19. Sorry, that's lower than any of the guys that Eddie Faulkner has worked with. Jalen Warren was 0.28. He has one guy at 0.20. I think that's Gainwell, and then two guys at 0.21. James Conner and Najee Harris. That's it.
See, Najee, I was always expecting was going to be able to break more tackles at the pro level, and he was sort of did not. But a couple thoughts on Faulkner. I don't know a ton about him, but when you go to the Steelers message boards, they are sad to see him leave. So that to me is an indication that he was a good coach. Now, running back coach, at least in the college ranks, is sort of considered the least important coach from a technical coaching standpoint. Oftentimes, they are earmarked as the head recruiter, and they find a guy that's a good recruiter and have him fill that position because a lot of times running backs go from high school to college and they're pretty much ready to run. And the same going from college to the pros, part of the reason why the position is devalued. But I do think it's notable. Kenny Gainwell was a much better player last year than he was for Philadelphia. Yes. And so that's definitely a good sign.
By the way, big increase in missed tackle rate for him, specifically in his first year with Faulkner. So that was a big deal. By the way, companies, if you want to hide an underperformer, you put him in purchasing. That's it.
Sure.
That's it. I know. I know that saying. I know you have a purchasing background in the restaurant business, but I know you're much more than that, boss.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to the next one. I kind of want to go down to in the list here to Joe Lombardi, who's hired as a senior offensive assistant. 10 years working with Drew Brees. So we are dipping yet further into the Peyton tree here. failed in 2 chances as offensive coordinator. I think it's 2. If he had a third, I missed it. But Detroit and Denver, no, wasn't he the Chargers OC too? He was the Chargers OC, wasn't he?
I don't recall.
Maybe not. Okay.
I don't know if I'd characterize Denver as failed. I think they just really wanted to keep Davis Webb, and that's why they made that move. Because they had to open up the spot for Webb.
Yeah, if you lose your job, even if you want to keep Webb, I mean, I got to say, well, okay. Anyway, here's what I expect to happen. I expect him to be an alternate viewpoint or point of contact with the players, and I think they have this on defense as well too. Now I'm 95% sure, but if the plays are going to be called from the booth by Doyle, then he'll be on the sideline to breathe fire at players as needed to have teaching moments with players. I think that could be very valuable. If he's not, if he's a guy who wants to be in the booth, then you need a really trusted guy on the headset to tell you what he's seeing. And Lombardi could do that, I'm sure, from the booth. So I think they'll want both viewpoints covered, and those two guys will do it in some way.
Yeah, it's a good yin and a yang. They have worked together between Lombardi and Doyle before, and you have a really novice offense coordinator, and you have now a very veteran senior consultant. They basically have the mentor already in place. Where if you remember, Zach Gore hit the rocks a little bit, and they brought you already have him now. So I think it seems like to be a good hire, very respected across the board. And I am interested to see who's going to be in the booth, who's going to be on the field. Any expectation, prediction?
My expectation would be that the offensive coordinator more typically in today's game is in the booth. So that's what I would expect. And then Lombardi will be on the field. But what I would expect from Lombardi also is that he's the play caller in waiting. And this is good insurance. So if Doyle fails and we have to acknowledge that there's that possibility, then you bring in Lombardi, and he's a high floor guy for your offense if he has to call plays. There have been Lombardi is a very horizontal attack guy, and I hate to say this because it's going to color the entire thing, but the guy who's kind of known for being that is Greg Roman.
Right,
being a horizontal, force the defense to defend the field horizontally. Now you want to force the defense to defend in 2 dimensions, obviously, but you really have to have a horizontal attack point of view to have a really good running game.
Yes, agree with that point for sure. So it's going to be a melding of different ideas, different philosophies to develop these game plans. And I like how Mentor is not going everybody from the same tree or everybody he's already worked with before. It's going to be a melting pot, it seems.
All right, let's move on to number 3 here. Before we do that, I want to just address something you just said. I think also Minter made the point that these guys are going to work collaboratively, and he was including Lamar Jackson in that, to build an offense that makes sense for the personnel they have. That's probably the most important thing. Any coordinator worth his salt is going to tell you that you build the scheme around the personnel and not the other way around. Now, there are some things when you have the ability to acquire players during the offseason, you have the ability to say acquire a fullback if you want to use a fullback. You have the ability to acquire a dime back if you want to use a dime back on defense instead of a committed nickel. So you have these options that exist organizationally. But I think my initial inclination is to believe Minter. That they really want to create something for Lamar Jackson that really fits him like a glove. Now, Lamar, there was an even greater commitment semantically to that, I thought, with John Harbaugh in terms of this is Revolution Baltimore. We'll build in this offense completely around Lamar Jackson. And that's really what they did.
Yeah, I think that for sure. 2019 was a revelation. It wasn't something that no one had ever seen before, but at the NFL level, it was certainly different. And a lot of teams have copied that, and it worked out well. But I like the fact that if you have different perspectives, you have some malleability. It's where, the league is cyclical, right? So for a 3 or 4 or 5 year period, one thing's in vogue, and then defenses figure out, and then you have to pivot to the next thing. If you have a lot of different minds from a lot of different backgrounds, you're more equipped to pivot. You don't just zigzag and then stay at the zag for 10 years. That's the way to do it, I think.
Well, fair enough. And that would speak to having different offensive coordinators, but hopefully you have an offensive staff that can adapt to the changes in personnel as well. All right, let's move on. A hire that I think just got announced today earlier is Israel Woolfolk. in as the QB's coach, which also means T. Martin is out. A little bit of a surprise. It was something that the Ravens had talked about potentially, or Ravens fans certainly had talked about keeping T. Martin, in part because of his outstanding relationship with Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, so I'd mentioned that a few weeks back that he would be one of the coaches that I'd look to keep. The more you think about it, you want somebody that speaks the same language as the offensive coordinator. And I would assume that Lamar was consulted in this process. Woolfolk was apparently they did 2 interviews yesterday, Wednesday, the 4th. Both Woolfolk and Ronald Curry, Buffalo's quarterback coach, both received interviews, and they chose Woolfolk. So I think just that's guesstimating that I think Lamar was involved in that decision.
So Woolfolk had previously coached Kyler Murray in Arizona for a couple of years. Grand Valley State alum. That's where Matt Judon came from years ago.
They overlapped.
Did they? They actually overlap?
They overlapped for 3 years, apparently. I saw that. I have to give Cole Jackson credit because he's the one that brought that to attention. Woolfolk won the championship, and then Judon came the next year, and then they overlapped for 3 years.
Okay. So he was a graduate student by then. Where do you actually play as college?
No, I thought they played together. They played together at GV State.
All right, I'll take a look. You might be right.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, he'll be 36 this year, which is another very young player in there, and I would presume that he's a guy who would move on and be an OC candidate at some point.
Apparently, he had already received OC requests for interviews earlier in this cycle, which is kind of surprising from a sort of an unknown guy. He was a wide receiver at Grand Valley State. He certainly helped develop Jacoby Brissett into the best season of his career last season with the Cardinals. And for what it's worth, they had the highest pass percentage in the league in Arizona. So he sort of brings some of that perspective. His players that he's worked with speak highly of him. I've seen some of the quotes. He seems to be a little bit of a philosophical or analytical driven coach, which I think could be a really nice compliment to Lamar. That's like a best friend type of but close confidant type of relationship where you see the quarterback as soon as this series is over, the drive is over, they're on the tablet looking at it with their QB coach. And if somebody can give you a little bit different perspective, again, I think that's all the better.
All for it. Now let's move over to the defensive side. And also,
real quick, Ken, let's touch on the 2 open positions on offense still. Tight end, which we don't know, we haven't heard, at least I haven't heard any rumors, and wide receiver. We lost Lewis, which we touched on last week, potentially a big loss. They're apparently interested in Tyler Tettleton, who's the son of former Orioles catcher Mickey Tettleton. Wow. Yep. So apparently he's a name on the rise as well. So all these coaches seem to be highly regarded, and the fan bases they're leaving, missing them already, and they all seem to have aspirations to rise up the coaching ladder.
So Mickey Tettleton, there's a lot of I assume people know the whole history of Ravens and the Orioles as well, but there are a lot of fans who just missed Mickey Tettleton entirely. Mickey Tettleton was one of the central figures in the 1989 Orioles why not season. So they in 1988 they lost 107 games, and they traded Eddie Murray in that offseason. Really, we're rebuilding the team. Frank Robinson came in and managed the team, and they came within 2 games of the Toronto Blue Jays. They lost in the final weekend 2 out of 3 to them. If they'd won 2 out of 3, they would have come home for a playoff game in Baltimore. But Mickey Tettleton hit 26 homers that year, had a really big year. So
I vaguely remember him. I remember he always used to have a big lip full of dip.
Oh, really?
But I think he was he was before Chris Hoyles, right? And then Hoyles became the primary catcher after him, if I recall.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So Hoyles was one of my favorite players too. I'm sensing that might be the case here. All right. So and George Godsey, big loss at tight ends. They lost him much earlier in the process, right after the season ended, basically.
Yeah, I think it was before they even let go of Harbaugh. It was right after the season ended, the next day.
All right, let's move over to the defensive side. So the name and the headline is Anthony Weaver here, getting the job as DC, where he will not call plays. Mentor is going to call plays. But Vas and I have talked about this already some. A great complimentary hire for Minter because he's a defensive line coach. And I think it was ideal to have a front seven coach who would be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know he was within your top 3 or 4 as far as head coach. And he was in my top 6. So to be able to land him as your defense coordinator is quite the coup, especially because he's not even calling plays. He brings that leadership that, can only be a benefit to Minter. He brings the organizational knowledge as a player that was drafted by and coached for the Ravens. And he also has, and again, Minter comes from a secondary background, so he comes from the defensive front background. And there's also potential of compensatory picks down the road. So this was a home run to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that has to play into that, and that's exactly why the rule is there. So I'm not I don't think we're being, I don't even know what I'd call it, insensitive or whatever the word might be to say that Weaver's getting the shot. It's there to create additional opportunity, and Weaver is a great compliment within this staff. Apparently, he has to work for the Ravens for 2 years before they'll get this. Now that there might have been a change to the Rooney Rule. I'm not 100% sure of that. But I think there's a reasonable chance of that. And in 2 years in Miami, the defenses did not really improve there. They did trade away Jalen Phillips at the deadline. The offense was, cratering for a fair amount of the early part of that season. And so they didn't, it wasn't a particularly great Dolphins defense. He's part of that amazing Ravens 2023 defensive staff that led 3 coaches hired away as head coach or defensive coordinator, including McDonald, of course, but Denard Wilson also to Tennessee and Weaver.
Yeah, excellent staff for sure. That was one of the best in team history, I would say. Maybe that in 2000.
2000 is unbelievable staff.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. We'll talk about, I think, the second biggest hiring, and I expect this again to be a Booth Field relationship, is PJ Volker, the senior offensive assistant and safeties coach. Now, he has worked and played with Minter pretty much all the way through on their time. They had time together at Indiana State and in their playing days, and there's one other place that they've coached together that it's not on the tip of my tongue right now. Volker spent the last 7 years at the Naval Academy, 3 years as a defensive coordinator. But before that, they were pretty much together. Here's what I see happening with Volker. He's another guy who he brings a linebackers coach's background, so that's a nice additional compliment. But I think he'll be in the booth, and Weaver I would see as a defensive coordinator on the field. I think Weaver is the guy, because that connection is so close with the players, that he'll be the guy to go over and get in people's face and talk to them, having teaching moments when they come off the field. But Volker will be a very primary guy on the headset that Minter trusts to tell him what he's seeing from the booth, because Minter obviously has to be on the field as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think Volker has strong ties, obviously, to Minter. I definitely agree with your synopsis there as far as who's going to be where. And here's another instance of a college defensive coordinator coming to the NFL as a position coach, as well as Tyler Santucci, who's the Ravens inside linebacker coach. So, the game planning should be, competitive, Socratic method or something like that.
Collaborative is, I think, yeah.
Collaborative. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. All right, great. Let's move on. The next guy, another recent hire, is Miles Taylor, an assistant DB coach. Now, they're already very heavy on DB coaches that have been hired because they got Mickens. Minter, of course, comes from that background. Miles Taylor now, who's 31 approximately. He turns 31 or 32 this year. I forget which it is. I think it might be 31 this year. He was set to coach the safeties at Nebraska. He just signed with them. And then he kind of reneged on it and didn't go through with it. But he was a Ravens intern all the way back in 2019, then spent 6 years at South Dakota from 20 to 25.
Yeah. So he's the assistant DB coach. A little surprised that there isn't a specific person earmarked to cornerbacks. Maybe that is still yet to come, as far as I can tell. Or unless Mickens is also secondary.
Mickens is secondary, yeah.
Right.
Secondary and pass game defense. That's his
pass game coordinator, right.
Yeah.
And we haven't heard who's the run game coordinator necessarily on defense and who's the pass game coordinator necessarily on offense. We'll see if those, and there could also be a pass rush coordinator or as well. So, Last season, John Harbaugh had 25 coaches on his staff. The Ravens have approximately, I want to say 12 or 13 at this point. So there's still, another dozen or so to be hired and identified. But it just seems like they're bringing the best and brightest wherever they can. And if Anthony Weaver does get a head coaching job next year, which is no guarantee, you have 10 jobs turn over this year. I mean, there's not good. I don't think that many of them are going to be reopened next year. But you have a pipeline of guys now where Volker could be promoted to coordinator, and then Taylor could take Volker's job and continue that pipeline. So just great to see talented coaches added to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's if there's one thing, just going for talent and going for youth really pays off. And the Ravens had gotten a little bit older at some positions. They've had some older coaches in the defensive backfield and other places. So nice that this is going on this way. And depth is always good. Anyway, the next one this is an interesting one. Well, actually, let's talk about the defensive line, outside linebacker. They don't have those coaches set yet. Matt Robinson and Dennis Johnson are both headed to the Giants. Matt Robinson had been here for 4 years. Dennis Johnson for 2. So, losses certainly.
Yes.
Matt Robinson is young and very impressive at the podium. Dennis Johnson I'm not saying he's unimpressive at the podium. I just don't have the kind of experience with him. Matt Robinson, you hear him talking, he's going to be a good coach.
It's still an important role to fill. You need a real teacher up front teaching these guys, especially you have some younger, obviously younger players up front. You expect to be adding some more in the draft. So that's really a void that's yet to be filled. Interestingly, I mean, out of all the coaches, the only ones that we know that are returning, that are being retained, are Santucci and Randy Brown. I think that's probably going to be one of the key hires still yet to make, is that outside linebacker coach. I'm not doubting that Robinson was good at the podium. I would have liked to maybe see a little bit more development from some of the younger guys. So hopefully that next hire can just refine that. And like I said a couple weeks ago, the first round of coaches, you receive your bachelor's, and then the next round, maybe you get your master's, and then you get your doctorate after that sort of stepping up.
We have Chuck Smith still. I don't think his future has been determined yet. I believe he may be under contract, because otherwise I think Harbaugh would have been all over him probably in terms of moving him. But he's technically the pass rush coach for the Ravens, or was in 25. Probably is still under contract that way. I would not be surprised if he is back. Very loyal dude. He certainly could go with Harbaugh. He's incredibly loyal to Zach Orr. This last year talked about the 24 resurgence and whatnot. But that's interesting. He's kind of like the similar to T. Martin on defense. He's a guy that I think could bring a lot even to a new staff where a lot of new thinking is involved. I really helped the Ravens apparently in the draft process, looking over various pass rush prospects, and was high on Mike Green.
Yeah, I hope he comes back. We'll see. If he doesn't come back, I hope they do find somebody else to fill that role as pass rush coordinator. I think that's a good position, a good person to have.
So we got one other on special teams. They haven't decided on the coordinator, and then they have a game management coordinator. But the special teams coordinator, let's talk about that for a moment, because Horton is gone and Anthony Levine is still around. They haven't yet given it to Anthony Levine, which is a little bit surprising, but maybe he's not ready for it. Maybe it's
right.
It's he's 2 years away and he needs to learn more of the scheme and whatnot. I'm still a little surprised that they haven't done anything with that, or haven't really seemed to do the interviews for that. But they're hiring. They're down pretty much down to positional coaches. And you would think that a special teams coordinator would be higher on their list of needs. Now they do still have Randy Brown, and they're keeping him. And they have Levine under contract, but I don't know what the plan is for him. And then they have the possibility of going out, obviously, and getting somebody entirely new.
I think they're just, I would imagine that they have several candidates for every position that they're interviewing and in contact with. And when the moves are announced, the order doesn't necessarily mean that they're deprioritizing one. We saw that on the offensive side when they brought in Ledford and the assistant offensive line coach before the coordinator, and as well as on the defensive side with Mickens before Weaver. So I have a lot of faith that they're moving in the right direction based off what we've seen so far.
Okay. All right. Now, last coaching hire is one that I'm particularly interested in. So The Ravens have had a director of football strategy for the last decade, Daniel Stern, who's
Mhm.
not only been part of their football strategy, but he's played a big role in terms of their analytics department and making sure that they're good. Apparently, he's had interviews at least with the Browns. I think it was reported earlier that he'd already taken a job with the Browns. I don't think that's actually true, but maybe it was
Okay.
announced today and I've missed it. We're recording this Thursday at 4 p.m. It could well be that Daniel got hired today. But I do expect him not to have any problem finding additional work in the NFL. And the Browns make sense because they're very well developed in terms of the analytics that they use. So I would not
Mhm.
surprise me if they're interested with the De Podesta background, who the guy from Moneyball, Jonah
Yep.
Hill's character was there, of course. But anyway, they got a new guy, and they hired really young at this position, 26 years old, Charlie Gelman, as a defensive assistant and game management coordinator. Now, first of all, you always want that. If you're going to be a game, some sort of a tactical guy, a game management coordinator, you also want to be an assistant coach on one side of the ball. Daniel Stern was the assistant quarterbacks coach. So
Ah, I didn't know that.
yeah, Charlie Gelman's case, he's going to be a defensive assistant. But Gelman will be on the headset loop, of course, and he'll be responsible for, advising on fourth down decisions, for example, but on game management decisions. Do we kick? Do we go for it? Do we punt?
Right.
And a big one that I really hope gets more involved, because it's been a real punch in the gut to Ravens fans who understand the math of the game well, is more don't score decisions. That comes
Right.
into the Ravens lexicon. I think with him being 26, there's a good possibility of that. And last but not least, he finished the first honorable mention in the Big Data Bowl back in 2019. For football nerds, that is an unbelievably high honor.
Yes.
At that time, they weren't even restricting it to just undergrads, which they do now. So they have teams from Austria and whatnot that literally go around try to win modeling competitions of this sort for the money or for the prestige, because they want to do consulting work after that. They were going around and winning this. So when they developed expected yards, that was an
Mhm.
Austrian team that, that did
Mhm.
it, and not not a group of college students. So very impressive that he won that.
Interesting. He seems like a very sharp guy for sure. I do expect with Steve Bisciotti to continue to put up the budget and so the Ravens are on the cutting edge. I think that there's no question that's sort of an organizational credo that goes from the top to the bottom, every single department. So I'm optimistic. They probably have one of the bigger analytics departments in
Yeah.
the game, and we'll see.
I think it's about $20 million this year, might be 25 million, that they saved for Harbaugh being hired and having offset language in his contract. Actually might be 20 million, because I think he's a $20 million deal. So if that's and they might have structured it differently, that he makes only 1 million this year and he makes 25 million each of the next year. So the Ravens get burnt more by the offset, but hopefully not. So it's just like a player like a Awuzie that had the same kind of offset language. But if you think about that, I'm not too worried, generally speaking, about Steve Bisciotti spending his own money ever
Right.
on coaching budget. We're you spend the cap dollars, you're spending my money. But if you spend the money on coaches, that's fine. But I will say this: having that offset, maybe funding some additional investment in coaches that they might not otherwise spend the money to get.
For sure. Bisciotti, I believe, is the eighth wealthiest owner in the NFL. And that John Harbaugh's contract, the entirety of it, if he had to eat the whole thing, I think it was 1/10% of his wealth. So, the Ravens are fortunate to have Steve Bisciotti.
A tenth of if he had to eat the whole thing, was 1/10% of his wealth. 1/10
I
of
think
what?
so.
1/1000th of his dollars.
Yes.
Okay, so that might be about true. Bisciotti has about $6 or $7 billion.
I think
That's
8.5 or something like that.
okay.
Yeah.
Then we're if he had to eat the whole thing from scratch, if he had to eat the 80 million, then
Right.
all right.
Just one question before we move on, Ken. So, just to give the listening audience some idea what the coaches are now doing. I mean, the staff isn't put together, but I expect them to be in the lab, going through game tape from last year, looking at other things around the league, and hitting the ground running this month before they even really get into draft prep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's critical in terms of not only in terms of the draft, which they may or may not have a lot of say in the draft. I mean, DaCosta's silo should be in control of the draft. You want it to be a collaborative process. You want to try and build a consensus. I think you and I are both of the opinion that Harbaugh was not an ideal person to be. Okay, let me put it this way: Harbaugh's gravitas had grown to a point where it might have had an unhealthy impact on the draft.
Agreed.
Whereas normally, and the movie Draft Day did a great job of presenting this exact problem. Is Dennis Leary's character had come from a Super Bowl background. And he was showing off his ring and whatnot in the draft room to say, no, we need this. We need this to win this year. And then he finally drafts the players they want, and he finally shuts them up over that kind of thing. So
Right.
Hopefully, we don't have a guy who's Dennis Leary in the room who wants to be part of that consensus building team. And when the things don't go his way in terms of his expectations, it's okay with it. He's okay having a Malachi Starks be drafted instead of a Nick Amon-Wari, where I'll fly off the handle about it.
Right. Very true. Very true. I'm hoping that all the things that I disliked about the organization, they're all going with Harbaugh. Obviously that's not the case, but
we'll have new ones.
We can always hope for.
All right. Now, we haven't been able to we're going to have mailbag later in the show, but we haven't been able to get to other cut and trade and free agency stuff yet this year, but we're finally going to do it. And we still got a month before this. So, the Ravens' early exit from the playoffs has in some ways funded some of this coaching discussion time. But there are, a number of players on the Ravens who can be cut, actually 4 only, that can be cut for any kind of significant cap savings.
Right.
And some of those might be tradable. Let's maybe talk our way through those. Who would you like to start with?
I want to start with Roquan. I have quite a few notes on this one. I don't have nearly as many for the other folks, but I think a case can be made that the Ravens are better off trading Roquan Smith after this last season and trying to get a mid-round pick back, and you can take that mid-round pick and plug in a linebacker. And I have some notes, so I'll give a few, and then I'll let you respond and give a couple others. He was PFF's 20th graded inside backer this last season. His pass defense improved tremendously from where it was in 2024, where he was up close to 10 yards a target. However, his run defense suffered. In particular, he missed, I think I saw he was the 20th best tackler as far as missed tackles, which isn't great.
I'm surprised by that because he's never had a season as bad as 10% in terms of missed tackles in his whole career.
The 2 games in particular that really make you believe he's a player on the decline are the Detroit Lions game, where he just could not get off those duo blocks for the life of him, and the Pittsburgh game the last week of the season, where I think he had 2 missed tackles to 2 made tackles. And those are the games where if you're paying a linebacker and you're facing running back centric offenses, you need your linebacker to kind of step up and earn his pay. So I'll begin there, and we'll have a couple other notes, but let's start there.
Oh, well, here's my problem. I'm looking at 2019 to start with, so let me fix that. Here's how I do this. I look at players who had at least 50% of the snaps played at inside linebacker, because I don't want to include anybody who played, a couple hundred snaps only at that position. And then I sort by missed tackles, low to high. And Roquan is number 18, according to this, and Buchanan is number 19. But the rate is still very good. I mean, it's 8.3%. And if you look at that, the median for a inside linebacker would be at number 30 is 11.5%. That's, by the way, that's a very historic number too. Meaning 11.5% is fairly similar historically, because it comes up in draft stuff, all this stuff. So he's 70% of the missed tackle rate of the median inside linebacker in the league. And this is probably the worst year of his career, or pretty damn close to it. So
against the run. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be, I'm not overly concerned about that. I think a lot of it has to do with Roquan needs to have some good play around him. And, he should elevate both. He should elevate them too. I don't want to give him the Tyler Linderbaum out
what I heard someone say, well, they should draft a weak side linebacker in the first round to get the most out of Roquan. I'm thinking that is
the opposite. No,
he's the highest paid linebacker in the league. He's supposed to elevate the other guys.
And he does. So, I really believe he does.
Yeah, I think he does.
Let me tell you about the online cannabis company that's changing the game, Mood.com. They created an entirely line of functional gummies, 100% federally legal THC blends, discreetly delivered right to your doorstep. And here's the best part. You can get 20% off your first order at mood.com with the promo code Ravens. Now, I've tried a bunch of their gummies myself. Each one's totally unique. The Sleepy Time gummies knock me out right away. They help me unwind fast, leave me refreshed the next morning. The Epic Euphoria gummies, they're perfect for when your day just isn't going the way you want it to go. What makes Mood special is how they pair the THC with natural herbs and adaptogens. You won't find blends like this at any local shop. They've got gummies designed for focus, relaxation, clarity, even energy, all made from cannabis grown on small, family-owned American farms. No pesticides, no shortcuts, just high-quality weed you can trust. Plus, Mood backs everything with a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So head on over to mood.com, check out their amazing selection, and don't forget to use the promo code Ravens at checkout to save 20% off your first order.
Hi, folks. The Super Bowl is here, and MyBookie is where you can turn your bets into bankroll. Are you scheduled to go to the Super Bowl party and you don't want to be there? Yeah, I've been to that party too. Managing your portfolio of wagers through the evening can be your ticket through Super Sunday without getting caught up in your brother-in-law's political rhetoric. Whatever your take on the game, MyBookie has both side and prop bets to make your Super Sunday a lot of fun. That's why I use MyBookie. You've probably heard them talked about on Jimmy Kimmel Live for their deep board of prop bets. These bets become some long-lasting memories, including watching Refrigerator Perry score in Super Bowl 20 at 100-1 odds. If there's ever a time to get in, it's right now. One account, one wallet, bet the spread, live bet the second half, hit the casino during commercials. It all lives in one place. Go to mybookie.ag now, use promo code Ravens, and get your first bet covered up to $500. If it doesn't hit, use your bet back bonus token and run it back. Don't just watch the big game, make it pay on MyBookie.
This episode is sponsored by Kalshi, the largest prediction market in the United States. Kalshi lets you trade on real-world events, peer-to-peer, instead of playing against a sports book. Kalshi is available across the country, including California and Texas, and it's a really fun way to put your predictions to the test. So here's how it works. You buy a yes contract if you think something will happen, or a no contract if you think it won't. So if you've got an opinion this weekend, like will the Seahawks win the big game this year, you can choose yes or no and trade on it. And you're trading with other users similar to buying and selling stocks. You can jump in and out of your position at any time to lock in a profit or cut your losses. Kalshi also offers combo trades where you can connect multiple predictions across different events to increase your potential payout. In short, Kalshi is where you put your money to where your prediction is. So download the Kalshi app and use the promo code SB60. When you deposit $10 and make a trade, you get your $10 back. That's promo code SB60 on Kalshi.
So a couple other thoughts. Jesse Minter had his leading tackler with the Chargers was Deion Henley, who was a former third-round pick, and they had the number 6 defense in the league. If you look at the playoffs this season, you will find that most of the teams in the playoffs that have advanced far in the playoffs have neither a highly paid inside linebacker nor a highly graded inside linebacker. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, they're pretty cheap. There are only 25 linebackers make more than the 7.3 of savings potential. And ultimately, you have to save somewhere. And to me, the best places to save is inside backer.
I'm real positive on saving a weak side linebacker. And I'm somewhat positive. I believe you can rotate at the Mike spot too. And the Ravens have done it before with Josh Bynes and others in the past. But Roquan, the with and without Roquan play has been so dramatically different since he came to the Ravens in 22. It's not even funny. And one of the reasons I say that Roquan Smith improved a lot, needs other good players around him, is the fact that he improved so much from his time with the Bears. He just was a very inconsistent linebacker with the Bears. A number 1 pick, over 8th overall, right. Originally, but he'd been very inconsistent with the Bears before he came here. They're flashes. He was a good tackler, but then he became a great overall player and had 4 consecutive AP years, or 3 consecutive, I guess, AP years before this last year.
So I don't want to belabor the point, but I will say that in this last season, one of the defense's best performances of the year was against the Rams, a game that they did lose, but Roquan was out that game, and Buchanan and Simpson played pretty well. At 7.3 is not a ton of money but you might be able to bring back a Wouzier for that. You might be able to get 80% of Draymond Jones's contract for that. I saw PFF put out the projections, and Leo Chenal, the Kansas City inside backer, was one of their top 20, 25 guys, and they projected him to make $6 million a year. So it's a lot. It's not a lot of money, but it is a lot for a linebacker.
Okay.
So I'll leave it there. We can move on, but I think it should be considered for sure.
At least with Leo Chenal, you're talking apples and apples. So if they could get him at that same sort of price, I think I would be okay with that. I do like him as a player a lot. Roquan is he's the leader in getting to the gap. I think we obviously have a different
his comments from the podium after the season finale were pretty concerning to me. He said, Zach Gore's calling the right plays. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I just can't do it. And I think he's on the physical decline. So that's part of where I'm coming from.
That is a incredibly loyal and careful communicator too. Mm-hmm. Basically not wanting to throw Orr under the bus, not wanting to even throw his teammates under the bus. And it's elite player speak. We've seen also that, his instincts on field are unbelievably at another level. Robbie Alomar is the baseball player that, from my past that I would put in the same category as him. As a guy Jim Palmer knew exactly when to drop a bunt intentionally so he could get a double play out of the play. Roquan just has those instincts. The play where he let the guy get up so that the clock would run down to the 2-minute warning in the one game. I mean, just third level instincts. We say, you can't ask Zay Flowers to at least try to score a touchdown every play. Well, bullshit. You see this happen. Okay, let's move on because we've obviously got some difference of people. But that's what the show's about. We're supposed to show some texture here.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Marlon Humphrey.
Mm-hmm.
Start us off.
$7.3 million if he's cut, coming off one of the worst seasons of his career. He has been an every other year kind of player, but I'm not sure if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt at 29 years old. One of my favorite players. I personally like the culture that he brings to the Ravens. I know a lot of folks don't. He's sort of walk softly and carry a big stick, maybe a little bit of the opposite of Roquan. And he's one of the oldest, longest-tenured Ravens. He is good at ball production still. He's still a very physical player. I think we both thought that the move to safety may benefit him, but I can't keep him at this number. I think you go to Marlon and ask him for a 35% pay cut that he can maybe earn back with incentives, is incorporated with a move to safety where he can also give you some depth on the boundary if you're really in a pinch.
Exactly what I want Marlon Humphrey for. And we've talked over this obviously a number of times, but that's pretty much exactly what I would ask for. I think there's a very high probability if you move him to safety, he ends up back at corner sometime in 2026. Very high probability. When I say that, 60% that he plays some significant amount of time for you at corner. They always tried to move Jimmy Smith to safety. They tried it about 3 different times, as I recall. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not quite that many, but they moved it. They end up moving him back to the boundary eventually, and he does that. In Humphrey's slot, it could be in Humphrey's case, it might be the slot that he moves back to. So if Hamilton were hurt, it could be there is where he'd be needed.
He has some versatility for sure. I think his skill set is more conducive to safety than Jimmy's was.
Yes, I agree.
Just
much more Elfin build.
And he's a hitter. I mean, he can fill the alley, I think.
The other thing that I really like about him is that if you want to make the most of Kyle Hamilton, and I think that's got to be a central tenet of however the Ravens assemble their defense, is if they want to rush the passer with him, then Humphrey's a great guy to jump up into the slot and take that coverage because, the hot read then develops. The quarterback has to know how to do it. And you either want to make a tackle very quickly or you want to get up to the line of scrimmage so that Humphrey's actually making that coverage if, in that case, Hamilton would be kind of giving up his position. There's the fact that he's rushing early relative to the snap, but probably too late for them to still be doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So
interchangeability, and those are probably the 2 best ball hawks on the defense, and you can have them both there. I'd like to keep him, but I do think he needs to go down and pay a little bit. And I'm looking here because I meant to look at this earlier. Keon Martin's 5'9", 170, so he's pretty much limited to the slot. So, and he may be your second best corner at this point behind Wiggins because we still don't know what Tampa, longer being Marcone, really are.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been talking for a long time that I think cornerback is an enormous need in this draft, and it kind of sucks to have that. It's not as bad as offensive tackle because you can get cornerbacks in a variety of different rounds here. But if you want a really top one, you often have to go to the first round.
Mansour Delane out of LSU. I'd be pretty happy with him at 14, depending on how the board falls.
Okay. All right. So, but there's always a guy you could pick in the first round that you'd be pretty happy with at the position. It's good if you have multiple positions and then you're kind of agnostic to which one you get. But I want to know who are the real, and I don't know yet, who are the really good cornerbacks that might be available on day 3 that the Ravens could get a chance at, because they're gonna have a couple of day 3 returning corners in year 2 in Longer being Kone that we don't know what they have.
You don't necessarily need a first rounder, especially with hopefully an all-star defensive staff. But if the board fell a certain way, I know a lot of people wouldn't like that. They say, why do they keep picking corners and safeties? But if you don't have your edge, to me, an ideal top 3 would be edge rusher in the first, interior offensive lineman in the second, and then either receiver or corner in the third. But things will work out ideally. Anyway, let's move on here because we got quite a few players to get through. Justice Hill, $3.1 million cap savings. Ken, where are you with Justice Hill? Is this 2016 offseason cut?
Yeah, I think you redraft again and you try and do it right. I don't think Justice Hill is the workhorse that he would need to be the guy you had to keep. I think we saw some things from Ali in the passing game, more as a receiver than as a blocker. He did have one great blocking game, and I had such high hopes based on that. Kind of like I had, Falele's 5 games at the end of 24 really made me think that he could be an emergent star in 25. That didn't develop either. So
he was great in 24. He was excellent in 2024, Justice. I always liked him, but I agree with you. He's getting older. That's a lot of cap. 3.1 is a good chunk of change. And draft the guy, but don't draft him too early. You don't need a succession plan at running back. At any position, I don't want a succession plan at running back. I want 4 years where the guy's actually getting carries.
Yeah.
Draft him in the 4th or 5th or 6th. That's where you want to get your third running back.
Yeah, I mean, that's where they got Ali, and we had Ali cut a couple of times in this process. Certainly before the thing, I didn't think there was room for him. I thought, even after that, they weren't using him. Part of the problem is you go until week 15 and 24 before you have your very first RB3 carry. Week 15. Yeah. Right. Now Mitchell was on the field a couple of times before then, but Mitchell's first carry came in week 15. So just absurd.
Yeah. Very true.
Would you any chance you'd go to Justice Hill and reduce his dollars and try and get him to stay for that reason? Maybe convert him back into a part-time or a more of a significant special teams role.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I made mention of that during the season. I didn't think he should graduate from special teams just because he's getting older, and now you have to add another special teams guy to the 48 to fill his spot. To me, if you're contributing on special teams and you're second or third on the depth chart, you should be. Regardless of how many years you have on your resume.
I think the problem was last year they didn't have a third guy on the depth chart, so they couldn't afford to risk their second running back on special teams. But then he didn't go back and play a lot of special teams this year when they did have that guy.
Right, that's what I mean.
Right. So that was
right.
All right, let's see. Broderick Washington, $4 million of cap savings. One of the easiest decisions on the team. I don't think he's around.
Yeah, I think both Justice Hill and Broderick Washington are cautionary tales about extending mid-tier or low-tier players early because you don't always get the payoff. And I don't know what they really gained out of Broderick Washington these last few years. Now they can get out of it and save 4, which is good. But I'd rather save those early extension dollars for the high-end starter types.
It's fair enough. I mean, I don't think the Ravens got burned on the Justice Hill extension. I think they did get value out of that, particularly from 24. But Broderick Washington's been hurt or ineffective for a lot of his contract, unfortunately, his extension.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Isaiah Likely because he's probably behind Linderbaum, the big ticket item, I guess, behind maybe Draymond Jones as well. Let's thoughts off the cuff.
So I put him on this list. I want to exclude the UFAs for starters, but in Isaiah Likely, he's still a trade candidate if they tag and trade him. Linderbaum does not have that option associated with him. He has negative value. If you sign him, you might end up getting stuck with that contract on the franchise tag. And they don't have that with anybody else either. So Isaiah Likely is the guy. For the franchise tag would be approximately $16 million. I would think he has some minimal value above that in terms of trade, that you could get maybe a 6th round pick if you traded him for $16 million to somebody who's going to extend him then.
Yeah, I don't know if he's worth the risk of getting stuck with that franchise.
That's exactly what you got to be willing to take.
Yeah. Kyle Pitts is projected to get right around that, and he's a UFA. And you don't have to worry about it. And he was a top 10 overall pick. The only thing I would mention about Likely, he seems to be one of Lamar's guys, one of Lamar's best friends. I know you said a couple of times maybe overpaid for Linderbaum because he's one of Lamar's guys, make Lamar happy. I'd be okay to do that Likely on a very short-term deal, maybe a one-year deal where he can reestablish his market value, and they'll help the Ravens if they're going to get into this 12-13 personnel under Declan Doyle.
Then you have to pay for that relatively quickly. So you have to pay for that over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can have void years, and they can all accelerate into the 27 cap.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have a lot of options in terms of how you pay for that. I know they did it with Odell Beckham, where they re-signed him again with that basically that poison pill built into the contract that meant they had to cut him on a certain date. So they could figure out some kind of way maybe to scheme that money over 3 years. But it's I don't know.
I'm trying to figure out that. I was looking at that earlier, and somebody said, what would the team that trades for A.J. Brown even be on the hook for, because he's got 16 void years tacked onto his deal, and how do you even do the math on that? And I need to figure out how that works.
Well, the void years are all with the trading team.
It's option bonus void years. So it's a little complicated.
There's something different about them. Yeah. Then it becomes a question for Brian McFarland. So we'll have
exactly.
All right. So let's move on to Rashad Bateman. I don't want the Ravens to trade Rashad Bateman. I want the Ravens to fix Rashad Bateman. In fact, I think that's one of the biggest things they need to get in their wide receivers coach is somebody who can figure out him, and then for having the rest of the pass game coordination team that's being put together as we speak, be able to figure out how to get him back in the offense. I don't think part of it this last year was extended plays were not good. And part of it is that a lot of his value comes because he's the best route runner on the team and can separate at the top of the stem. The Peyton offense should improve that in terms of him getting more of those opportunities, but he's also just got to get more deep shots, more, more trust from Lamar in general to get him throwing the ball when he's not completely open. And we saw, one guy who got some shots like that this year, Tez Walker. Got some nice deep shots, when he was even and leaving, as opposed to.
I'm excited about Walker moving forward. Bateman, I think, he had a couple drops that were, not great. So ordinarily, and this is a player that's now had some comments in social media and then he said, that his account got hacked. But he agreed with some of the things that the hacker said.
Yeah. But, my uncle Eddie did it, and
that was pretty comical. Ordinarily, this would be a player that I think the Ravens would look to trade, as they did with Hollywood Brown, etc. However, he's $8 million underwater if they traded him or released him, and that's not the $8 million extra would accelerate onto his cap number. So to me, you got to play out this year and see where it goes.
Right. I would agree with that. And then he has a very affordable contract for the Ravens. It's just at the very beginning of it. And you need to savor those years. You need to get value out of those years when you're at the beginning and the cap numbers are not super high and the money's pushed out into the future. If they it could be still that they trade him down the line. But I really hoped that when he signed this extension, this was going to really be the thing that did it. But part of the problem is the motivation that comes along with that. The reasons why he wanted to sign an extension that was kind of below market are probably not good. So he might have needed the money for something. And we never know.
What was the Travis Jones situation? There was the same Travis where he didn't report to the camp the first day. So 1 year,
two different contracts. Two different contracts. Okay. So Bateman originally signed a cheap contract, and Jones signed a cheap contract. They were the same thing, that they were late for camp or whatever the thing was, and they can blame it completely on their agents. But then Bateman signed another extension to extend it for 3 years. And that was just this last year that took him through 29. And
I wish they didn't do it. I wish they would have played hardball.
Well, the contract through 29 is great value. I mean, it's fantastic value coming off the year he just had. I mean, it's just like, well, how on earth did they get him to sign this? And it probably is the motivation is he really, really needed the money. And then second, for whatever reason, I don't know what it might be, maybe starting a music business, maybe, lost some money at something, bad business venture, gambling, whatever it might be. And he needed the money. And when someone signs it like that, they really don't consider that as, you made a really fair deal with them. And, the Ravens, they didn't have the other side. They weren't the counterparty to whatever, deal made him need this money, whether it was he overspent or, whatever it might have been. And so, but they're the ones who may bear the brunt of this occurring. So anyway,
let's hope they mine the value out of this contract this year for sure. And then
Yeah.
you can reassess next year and see where you're at. Zay Flowers, I see you put him on the list here. You want to explain?
yeah. So they have a 2027 fifth-year option due on Zay Flowers, and this is the point at which they traded Hollywood Brown. Now with Hollywood, I don't think they really wanted to pick up the fifth-year option. They hadn't. I don't think they'd come to the deadline to do it at that point, but they did. I don't think they wanted to. With Zay, they probably think it's a reasonable value for receivers across the league, but they also probably think, hey, maybe we're better off drafting a receiver. And it wouldn't shock me if he were traded, as ridiculous as this seems, because he's so good, on draft day, and they got something pretty significant for him. So with a fifth-year option on there, I don't know if you get a 1 for him, but I think you get at least a high 2 for him. You might get a 1 for him. You might really get a 1. And I've made the point that Bateman's contract, I think, was worth a 1 after 2024. But I don't really know in Zay Flowers' case, because they'll be locked in at a very high 50-year number, or they'll have
28.
to start with that as part of the understanding in negotiations.
Yeah, $28 million because he made 2 Pro Bowls. The number jumped from 24 to 28. I wouldn't trade him for less than a 1. And if you do trade him, I think you have to use that pick, or not that pick, but an equivalent pick on a receiver. I didn't have a problem with the Hollywood trade. I had a problem making the Hollywood trade and then not replacing the talent at receiver. So anyway, you want to go to Nnamdi Madubuike?
Yeah, let's do that.
Go ahead.
Well, they can't really trade him and have any kind of big cap savings, but here's why you might end up trading him. They're at some point they're going to have to deal with the fact that Nnamdi is retiring. Now, there've been, by the way, a bunch of social media posts from Nnamdi that are cryptic in nature these last few days, at least. What do you take from those? Let's start with that.
Yeah, let's actually even get to the question, because we have a mailbag question on this from Gua. Guess you saw Madubuike's post. Even if he returns, I think we have to be sure we attack the D-line. Bilal Nichols from the Cardinals is a warning story. Do you agree? And he has a side note. I would love if we start having real set captains. So I thought my confidence level that he would return before these posts was 10%. And I think with each post, I think it has been raised by 10%. The last one in particular, where he said, you can either quit or you can keep on going. It hurts either way. Kind of, why would you put that out there if you're not planning to come back? I just don't see any, just to get attention. He just doesn't seem like that kind of guy.
He doesn't want to quit his broadcasting career or his career in training of young defensive linemen.
Is that painful though?
No, I agree. I don't think it makes sense unless he really thinks there's a chance he can come back. And it's one of the last things that these guys ever want to do is give up on something that they've done their whole lives and they're so invested in. And Nnamdi is the case. Zach Orr was the case. He tried to come back a couple of times before he finally had to get away from it and go to coaching. Honestly, you see it in young players too. And Jeremy Lucien, who's a friend of the show, is a guy who, he's going to play this out as long as it will go. By the way, Jeremy Lucien, if you didn't know, signed by the Ottawa Rough Riders, and we'll be going to camp with them in May. So we'll probably continue our discussions with him about, hey, what's it going on? What's it like to play in Canada and that kind of thing.
Nice.
But a nice move for him.
As far as Nnamdi, we don't know what the injury is. We obviously don't want him to put himself at risk to be, in a wheelchair. I do remember Ed Reed had a nerve impingement in his neck that they said if he got hit the wrong way, he wouldn't be able to walk. And he played 3-4 years after that, maybe more. Obviously, as a fan, you hope he's healthy enough to play. I don't think there could be any single move this offseason that would be better for the Ravens than if Nnamdi is able to return to the field at the same level he played at before. You add him to the defense, and you're cooking.
Yeah, that would be an enormous add, and obviously it's almost 10% of the cap they lost in terms of not having him available. Let's move on. Keaton Mitchell's an RFA. Now, I don't really think he's not an easy guy to trade because I think the Ravens want to keep him. But with this RFA tag, they're in a weird situation that the minimum RFA number might be more than they really want to commit to. Or they might be willing to commit the minimum, but they're not guaranteeing it because the RFA tags are not guaranteed, by the way, folks. If you cut the guy, it's not guaranteed salary, and they go to nothing. So what they've done in the past is go back to those guys and say, hey, Hurst and Jensen, they both got it in the same year. We're lowering both of your salaries to 1.3 million instead of the 2.5 million you were supposed to make.
They were drafted. They must have had different RFA rules back then.
Both drafted, right? Both RFAs the same year. Both signed a $2.5-3 million contracts. Both had them reduced at the same time.
Interesting. I remember them doing that with a couple different special teams type guys. I'd be in favor of that. I want Keaton back, but I want Keaton back cheap. Apparently, there was interest in him at the trade deadline last year because the Ravens weren't using him, and they balked at that. So there is interest in him around the league. I mean, not too many players have his electric ability. CJ Okoye, I see he's on the list here. Okay.
I mean, it's an end of camp move in his case. He's IPPP, so he's a free spot essentially is there for him on the practice squad if you don't have another guy competing with him, which the Ravens certainly might. But I think if you're not going to have him on the roster at the end of camp and you think he's not going to make it through waivers anyway, I think you try and trade him. And I think that there's probably a 7th round pick out there for a player like Okoye with some NFL experience and fabulous size.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's go on to Aeneas Peebles here. I think the big thing we need to know is if he has a spot in Minter's defense. He is kind of limited value in terms of how the defense was run last year. If the Ravens have a bunch of leads to protect, he could be a good closeout pass rusher for you in some games. I don't think he's a terrible choice as a 5th defensive lineman active for a game because I think then you put him in and you suffer through mediocre run defense as opposed to kicking in an outside linebacker to play 5 tech or 3 tech. Which is really a much worse situation. So I think that, I don't have a problem with him being the 5th defensive lineman active for a game. And I really didn't like the fact that the Ravens had 4 for a number of games this year.
I agree with that. I may be wishful thinking, but I'm going to chalk up his disappointing rookie season to Zach Orr and John Harbaugh overemphasizing run defense because they could have used some more juice on the D-line. And I'm going to hope that the new coaching staff can get him back Peebles to become a contributor. I think he could become part of the solution as an interior pass rush.
That would be great if true. And I'd certainly be all for it. By the way, Matt Ruff and I did a podcast that came out yesterday. So it would come out on Thursday related to the ideal 48. And it's how you construct your 48-man roster for game day in terms of the minimums. It really, you're very tight on where you can have spots. So we talk about, a lot of special team specialists. You can really only afford to have 2 guys that aren't in your regular rotation of players or in your expected set of backups to fill, the kind of the minimum needs that you have options on. And, the one guy was terrific value on special teams this last year, but he's going to be at risk his whole career if he doesn't learn how to play safety at a high enough level that the Ravens can trust him back there is Keandre Jackson.
I think usually when you play special teams to that level, it translates, even if he's a dime back or something like that.
Well, if he could be a dime back, that'd be terrific, even though that's not what the Ravens need with they have Hamilton. They need a back-end split field guy. And Jackson has the tools to be that. The Ravens aren't there in terms of trusting him in that role yet.
Good point. Tavius Robinson, I hear, he is now eligible to be extended after his 3rd year. Could also be a trade candidate potentially.
Yes. I think it's unlikely because the Ravens only really have 2 guys they're building their outside linebacker core around. And one is Tavius Robinson. The other is Mike Green. Everybody else is a free agent. So don't expect Van Noy back. Owe is obviously gone now. Draymond Jones is a free agent. They may, he's probably high on their list of players that they'd like to retain, but then they also have other options to get players cheaper. And Draymond does represent kind of a mid-tier contract that you hate so much. I'm also leery of it at his age.
Yeah, PFF had a pretty bigger projection on him than I thought. I don't know off the top of my head.
15 million or something?
I think it was. It raised my eyebrow a little bit. I like the Tavius. I think he's a good outside linebacker 3. As far as being an edge setter, I don't think he's ever going to be a high-end, twitched up, off the edge game wrecker. So I think he slots in nicely on the 3rd spot of the depth chart, and I'd be willing to extend him for that type of money.
All right. TJ Tampa, let's get to him. we don't know where he fits in the Ravens' plans right now. Right now, though, he's a guy who would get significant playing time if they make the moves expected in terms of, say, Marlon Humphrey moving either to being out or at safety. And they don't draft highly at corner, meaning if they draft a third round guy, could well be the Tampa's ahead of him anyway. This next year. If they draft a fifth round guy, it's almost certain. And then they have Kone and Longerbeam, but he'll be in a competition. I think he played well enough this last year that he's earned some snaps. I think he's worth a risk. I also think they're going to do the same route that they will at outside linebacker, where they bring in veterans to complement what they have in terms of younger players.
Yeah, I think so. I think they definitely need a veteran at corner. As you used to say, you can never have enough corners. You need at least 6, if not 7, entering camp to get to 6 on September.
Yeah, completely agree. And they undershot it last year with the injuries they had. Let's get to the mailbag. Couple questions here. Randy Sovich, thanks, Randy. You've asked a lot of questions over the years. This one, you've narrowed the universe so low, I'm not sure how to answer it, but I'll say this. How many coaches who won a Super Bowl in their first 5 years and failed to get back in the next 5 win another with the same team? I can just tell you that the number of coaches who meet all the first 2 requirements is so small that I can't. I'd be surprised if there's been anybody who met that exact criteria.
I'd point Randy to Mike Sando's article, which came out, I want to say, in October or maybe November, where he was saying, I don't know about John Harbaugh's long-term, if he could ever get back to one. And he had a big chart about, I think he said no coach has gone longer between Super Bowls. I don't remember how many years it was. I guess Belichick had a lapse there before kind of New England's second, rise up. But yeah, it does seem that. How many coaches even coach that long anyway?
That's the problem. Is you're already talking about anyone who's coaches for 10 years. You're talking about such a small group of and they didn't. He's not necessarily saying 10 years, because it might be win the Super Bowl in your first year, then you don't win it in years 2 through 6, and then you have to win it after that. So it could be less. But even coaches who've been in 6 years, if you look at the number of games coached, it falls off very dramatically. Sure. 2 things about that. One is that it falls off very dramatically for interim coaches, season finishing coaches, guys who suck and get fired in their first job right away. The other thing you'll notice is that about 2/3 of all the coaches have losing records. Does that make sense? 2/3 of all the coaches that have ever coached in the NFL have losing records. And the reason is the good coaches eat up a whole disproportionate percentage of the total wins, and everybody else has to share the under 500 record.
Makes sense.
All right. You, Cole, put a percentage chance and desirability on these players with Minter ties coming back to the Ravens as free agents. I'm loving this one. Odafe Owe. Okay, I'm going to write these down as we go, the way I always do. Okay, I got my number.
Chance or desirability?
Oh, okay, either one.
See, personally, I have a hard time. I would, to me, I kind of did this as desirability, because I just can't. It's so hard to put we had 18 years of data with John Harbaugh to say, okay, we can make this estimation, we can make this guess. We have no earthly idea of what Jesse Minter and Eric DeCosta are going to do now. So to me, desirability was kind of but I would want Owe back at the right price. But he'd be my second most desirable of this list.
Okay. All right. We could. Okay. I'll just give a percentage in each case.
Sure.
That I think he comes back. I think the percentage chance Owe comes back is 15%. It might be less. That may be very aggressive in terms of.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
Okay. Mac. Now, Khalil Mack has been around the league a long time. He's 35 years old, or he will be by the time the season starts. He'd be the kind of guy that I'd be looking for the Ravens to find in the bargain bin after he's had a bad year, kind of thing. He's not the kind of guy I want to sign after he's had a good year, which is where he is right now. I'm a no on him in terms of desirability. What do you think?
He'd be my most desirable. I've always been a fan of his. He's pretty much 50 pressures and 8 sacks every year. That's what PFF put in there right up. I think he would fit nicely, but I don't know if he has any loyalty to Minter at all. He was in Chargers before Minter even got there.
Sure. But he may have liked what happened last year, even seeing Owe come in and done well. He may want to play in Baltimore, but I think it's a very low percentage chance the Ravens sign him, but for the dollars involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tier Tart. Now that's a good one. Interior guy definitely would be a great addition. I've been doing this project where I'm looking at Owe's snaps, and Tier Tart is impactful on the interior of the Chargers line.
I just think you already have 3 nose tackles. Do you want a 4th? You already have 3 if you count Jenkins and you're keeping Okoye. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. He did not post a sack last year. So he's more of the pocket pusher that opens up, but you already have that with Jones and Jenkins. So I'd steer clear unless you're getting him really cheap.
Okay, fair enough. Tony Jefferson just had a fantastic year at safety this last year. Frankly, he was much better than Gilman. He was one.
That's why they traded. That's why they traded Gilman, right?
Yeah. But he had a terrific year last year. He was one of the lowest in yards per target across the entire league. I'd have to look at that again to see just how well he worked out there. But
to me, that's a pretty strong sign of support for Jesse Minter's defense, because I remember Tony struggling in coverage towards the back end of his time here. I'll lump both these guys together because although Gilman's also mentioned for Q's question, hell no to both the strong safeties. I don't want to pay for a strong safety skill set. I think you can find that much cheaper than what Jefferson or Gilman are going to command.
All right. I really wanted to have this here because I know Tony Jefferson was outstanding. He's targeted, looks like 40 times the whole season and gave up. Come on, where's his yards here? That's got to be in here. Sorry, give me just a second on this.
Take your time.
Don't mind. Yeah.
I'll filibuster. So the other question was Marcus Williams. Hugh mentioned Marcus Williams. So as a reclamation project, as a guy to bring into camp and see if you can get him back to his level of play from 2022, 2023, I'd be in favor of that. I'd actually be more excited about Williams than either Jefferson or Gilman because he has more of the free safety skill set. And it's just so boggling that he just fell off the cliff like that. I still haven't seen one plausible explanation for it.
What's your AAV number for him, or is it a 1-year deal?
For Marcus Williams, 1-year vetman. Even if he makes a team. But the strong safeties, I just don't see the appeal with how this roster is currently set up.
Okay. Tony Jefferson, by the way, had less than 4.5 yards per target last year. It was only 14 targets, but only gave up 63 yards. 62 yards. Back to Marcus Williams for a second. I think a lot of it depends on how he left the team. And I think also the stuff with Oweh, I think that's how they left the team. It's really a DaCosta decision. It's not a Minter decision. Now, it's true that Minter coached him last year and got more out of him. So from that perspective, Minter should be able to like at least advocate for why Oweh is different than when he left the team. But I think there were reasons they traded Oweh, and it wasn't just a matter of cap savings. I think there was more to it than that.
Yeah, it seemed to be he was not, getting along with the previous coaching staff. But new staff now, then maybe that changes things. If you're looking at edge, you want to spend money for an edge, Jalen Phillips is my guy. I don't want to trade picks for Max Crosby, and I don't want to pay declining Trey Hendrickson. So if you want to pay up at edge, Jalen Phillips, top 7 in pressures last year, he's my guy.
What are you willing to go for him?
I'd go 22, 24, something like that. I mean, that's if you're going to pay up, that's what it's going to cost. But I think he might be worth it. I think
he might end up going for more than that. So
he could. And if there's got to be some top dollar there. It's not an unlimited check, but he'd be the guy if you really want to go for it.
Okay. You Cole asked also, could he fix a Jabo? No. I'm not. I mean,
agreed.
I think the problem we've been through with the Jabo is not that there isn't some amount of talent there. I think he's not a particularly physical player. I think that part of the rest of the problem is that he's inert material. So if you bring him back 1 year non-guaranteed vetman contract, I can do that, and then you get rid of him in camp. But if you're bringing him in and taking a roster spot, I'm completely opposed to that. I mean, I'm even really not thrilled about him taking a 90-man spot, honestly, at this point.
I think a lot of some of the Falele is the same for me there. Just it's time for a change. And it's not that Ojabo did anything wrong, but he had the 2 injuries and they sapped his athleticism and lower body strength apparently, and he's just never going to regain it. And it is what it is. It's a sad thing, but I hopefully he invested his career earnings wisely so far.
There you go. All right. Timothy Hancock, do you foresee Jesse Minter having the same influence on the draft as John Harbaugh, i.e. Ben Cleveland? No, I don't. And I think part of it is just newness to the organization. They come in as equals. I think Harbaugh, Harbaugh had an undue amount of influence, as we talked about earlier, largely because of his tenure and friendship and whatnot. That was probably a little bit unhealthy for the organization. He tends to be more of a firebrand than DaCosta is, who's more of a natural consensus builder. And I think that my guess is that Minter will take a back seat to DaCosta's long-term success as a general manager and with the draft.
I'd agree with that completely. There seems to be a little bit of animosity between Harbaugh and DaCosta from what we've gathered from their various press conferences. Apparently that's the rumor, that things aren't so hunky-dory with the neighbors there. I think DaCosta is going to use this as his opportunity to put his stamp on the roster that maybe he felt like he wasn't able to do quite as much the last couple of years. It's only natural when you win a Super Bowl to get some more cachet in the draft room, which I think we can kind of draw that connection point if you see some of the differences in player decisions coming from 23. And then you have Harbaugh as a 12, 13-year veteran head coach with a brand new GM. Of course he's going to have some kind of – but now DaCosta's been here drafting – well for several years, a handful of years. Minter's a brand new head coach, and now DaCosta is going to probably have the scale tipped in his favor.
Right. All right. Vas, always a pleasure doing this show with you, and we went way over as usual. We got to be just a little bit more conservative in terms of the content we try and jam into these shows during the off season. But fortunately, we're having them every week this year, as opposed to every 2 weeks. It's been a great pleasure. Vas, tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
The pleasure's all mine, Ken. I am at Vasilis Lerikos on Twitter X, VASILISLERIKOS. And we're going to start doing our Ravens Way podcast semi-weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. We're not quite sure, but we are going to have an episode tonight on the 5th of February. The Ravens Way is the YouTube channel. I know Yuri was down at the Senior Bowl. He has some good intel on the prospects, and Garnett's going to join us with some free agency spreadsheets and that sort of thing. So please check it out.
Oh, I will. That sounds good. Other folks out there, thanks for listening. As always, use hashtag Film Study Mailbag if you want to questions on this show, certainly, or I'll direct them to the proper show during the off season, or even do them in a 1 to 3 minute video that I'll post on Twitter and Reddit. Thanks to all the Reddit listeners in particular. Use hashtag Film Study Mailbag directly in a post there. I will find it. I promise you. For Vas Lerikos, this is Ken McKusick saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next week on Friday Morning GM.